Hello and welcome to Media Monitor on the SABC News Channel, independent and impartial. Now this is where we take a look inside the world of media, analysing the trends, the issues and the reporting of some of the week's top stories. I'm Peter Ndoro and this is what's coming up on the show. Remembering the passing of a global icon, we'll also be kicking off this week's discussions with the chaos that engulfed Cricket South Africa, where 5 sports journalists had their media accreditation revoked. We'll also take a look at the recent ruling by the concourt regarding publishing the identities of child victims, the accused or witnesses in criminal proceedings. And as usual, we'll be taking you back in history a little later on the show. Please don't forget you can engage with us on social media using the hashtag SABC Media Monitor. Hashtag SABC Media Monitor. But before we unpack those stories, let's first take a look at what's on the front pages of the Sunday newspapers this morning. And we start with the Sunday Times. Well, the Sunday Times and their front page story involves Cricket South Africa. Yeah, this past week was embroiled in its biggest crisis in decades, with embattled CEO Thabang Moruwe at the center of it all. He's now been suspended, facing a myriad of allegations, among them making moves against seasoned officials in favor of cronies, which has been seen as an attempt to capture the game of cricket from the cricket's old guard. The City Press is leading with South African Airways and say that the airline came critically close to total collapse, facing almost certain liquidation. A last-minute deal with lenders and governments saw the airline go into the hands of a business rescue practitioner. So severe had the problems become that global ticket sales dropped by 40% in a matter of days. The Sunday Independent headline story has President Cyril Ramaphosa allegedly at the center of a plot to kill the ANC, if you can believe that. The paper reports that some senior ANC leaders have accused the president of working with external parties to collapse the governing party and replace it with a centre-right coalition led by him after the 2024 general elections. Now, that is the same story on the front page of the Weekend Argus on Sunday, with the paper saying that sources told them that the president and his allies have been taking pains to privatize state-owned entities and destroy black-owned enterprises funded by the Public Investment Corporation, all in a bid to turn voters against the ANC. The Sunday Tribune is also following suit with allegations against the president and his alleged plot to destroy his own party, the African National Congress. The Sunday World has former President Jacob Zuma's health issues as its lead story, speaking about a health scare that saw the former head of state secretly fly to Cuba for treatment, all to do with complications relating to poisoning. We'll have more on that by the paper's editor, who's in studio with us today. All right, so that's the front pages of the print media. Let's take a look at what's captured your attention on the social media platform, Twitter. And a short while ago, these were the top 5 trends. And interestingly, 4 and 5, that's all to do with boxing, heavyweight boxing. Joshua got his title back. And the top trend, this was the first one for me, the Weekend Favor. That's one of the radio programs, Radio 2000, on a Sunday morning plays easy listening music. And that's trending at number 1, can you believe it? And then Amakosi for Life, of course, they beat Bloem Celtics 5-3 yesterday. But this one I suspect is going to trend quite big today. Evangelist Reinhard Bonke has passed away. So those of you who probably are into, probably into church and these kinds of ministries, you'll know him. He's very well known. And he passed away. His family has issued a statement that after a long career as an evangelist and spreading the gospel, he has now, as you can see from the messages, celebrated evangelist Reinhard Bonke at age of 79 has passed away peacefully, and many South Africans offering their tributes to this man on social media platform Twitter. All right, so that's what's happening on social media, but there's so much to get through on the show this morning, and helping us make sense of these stories are my guest editors. Let's meet Makudu Sifara, who's the editor of the Sunday World newspaper, and William Bird, director at Media Monitoring Africa. Good morning, gentlemen. Give us a wave. Yes, very good morning to you both. Thanks for joining us. All right, we begin. All right, so there's been shocking reports of Cricket South Africa having revoked the accreditation of 5 journalists that surfaced this past week. The organisation subsequently apologised without giving a real explanation for the debacle. The banned reporters are said to have been critical of the boardroom goings-on at CSA. The South African National Editors Forum, SANEF, noted the apology, but is adamant that such behaviour is a direct threat to media freedom and should never be repeated.
Well, this is nothing short of bullying tactics, quite frankly, and it's totally unacceptable, especially after we heard comments from CSA on radio yesterday, pretty much admitting that their accreditation was revoked because they wrote stories they didn't quite agree with. Well, if we're going to push for a free media in South Africa, and we're in the position where we do have a free media in a thriving democracy, then we need to understand that we can't police the things that reporters say. And as a result, if we don't like what they say, there can't be punitive measures, and we can't punish them by revoking their accreditation to events. It's totally unacceptable and can never ever be condoned. In fact, it must be strongly condemned. If you don't like the work that a journalist is doing, there are avenues that you can take. You can write your own piece to contradict what they're saying. You can hold a press conference. You can go to the Broadcasting Complaints Commission. You can go to the Press Ombudsman. But revoking their accreditation can never ever be accepted.
When you say to journalists you've been cut off at the knees, because that's what in effect this means, journalists are there and the media is there to report. No, from what I've heard, they've tried to engage with Cricket South Africa over not days, weeks and months, and got no response. And yes, it can get rough in there, but after all, that's life. You know, when you're an administrator, you're running a body, you've got to work with people. These are key stakeholders. So no one's talking about the fans. You know, are the fans going to want to go and watch cricket? Well, some will go along as usual, but for the moment, you know, you look at who is making up the South African cricket team. Who are the Proteas? Who's the technical committee? They're actually not giving out the information of who the technical... Well, you know, we live in a world where we want transparency.
All right, so we're now joined on the line by one of the 5 journalists to tell us a little bit more about this incident, and that's Neil Manthorpe, SABC cricket commentator. Neil, thanks very much indeed for joining us. And I've got to tell you, when I first heard about this story, I thought that it can't be a real story. Tell us what happened when you got your accreditation taken away from you. How did you find out what was happening?
Well, good morning, Peter. I also found it quite hard to believe. I arrived at Newlands to commentate on an Mzansi Super League game and scanned my accreditation as normal, and it said access denied on the scanner. I thought it was obviously just a technical glitch, so I asked an old administrative friend at Newlands whether there was a problem, and she said, "No, I'm sure it's just a glitch. I'll look into it. I'm sure it's fine." So she scanned it again. It said access denied. So she called Cricket South Africa just to clarify why it said that my access was denied, and she came out. She was actually a little tearful because this process has been almost an hour now. She said, "I have no idea what's going on, Neil, but Cricket South Africa have not only said that your access is denied, but they've told me to confiscate your accreditation." And she looked at me and she could see the look on my face, and she said, "Did nobody tell you anything?" And I said, "Obviously not. I hadn't heard anything at all. The first I heard of it was when the gate man originally said, 'Sorry, your access is denied.'" So, I mean... You know, you would have thought that if you were going to take that kind of a measure against a journalist, then you might have had the balls to tell him yourself.
So do you know where that order came from?
came from the new communications officer, who's only just been appointed, the new head of communications, Tami Msanka. We understand, he's never worked in sport or cricket before, but you know, it's not, Peter. I find the whole thing that people are being distracted by the fact that individuals, you know, I mean, as you know, when you report on the media, you don't like to be a part of it. I think the far more shocking aspect of this is that the head of communications at Cricket South Africa thought that he would be able to silence journalists. I mean, in my case, you know, there was also the fact that I was part of a four-man commentary team, and what about the listeners? You know, I mean, this is a game that the SABC is supposed to be in partnership with the Mzansi Super League, and you know, taking the game to the people. So he was shutting down part of the commentary as well. But I mean, just the idea that a head of communications could conceivably think that he would be able to control what was being written about the organisation by denying accreditation is just beyond my imagination.
Do you think he was acting alone, or did that come from higher up? You know, we see Thabang Morwe being suspended, being at the centre of a lot of things that have been happening at CSA. Could he have instructed this head of communications?
It is possible, and I don't know. But what I do know is that the head of communications told the staff, a member of his staff who's been working at Cricket South Africa for several years, to also remove the five of us from the SA Cricket Media WhatsApp group, on which information is commonly shared and press releases are flagged up, and it's just a very useful tool. But he personally instructed her to remove us from that WhatsApp group. To her great credit, she refused. But, you know, so that came directly from him rather than Thabang Morwe.
Is he still in his job?
I believe so.
And,
it's staggering, but yes.
So the apology that came, where did that come from?
Thabang Morwe called me himself and apologised and said that as chief executive, he had to take responsibility. The implication was that it wasn't his instruction.
All right, so there was this whole kerfuffle about Graham Smith being appointed a director of cricket at CSA, and that he eventually put out a tweet saying that the media has got it wrong, I haven't been appointed, and that this seemed to have been at the heart of some of the misgivings that CSA had against the media. Yes,
well, the Cricket South Africa, this is my reading of the situation and my understanding from some very good sources. Cricket South Africa were desperate to provide some good news and some reassurance to a dwindling and bewildered fan base. So the news that Graham Smith was being courted and was on the verge of signing a contract came directly from Cricket South Africa. It was a planted story that appeared on the back page of the Sunday Times to Graham Smith's deep disappointment, because that simply was. I mean, he called me very early on Sunday morning to say, this is absolutely not true. I am 1,000 miles away from signing. I've got grave concerns and misgivings. But, you know, that was, I mean, the irony about that story appearing on the back page of the Sunday Times as a direct leak from Cricket South Africa happened on the same day that I found out that my accreditation had been revoked. So, you know, on the one hand, you Cricket South Africa trying to control the media and at the same time use it to their advantage.
My goodness, media games being played galore here. All right, they had a press conference yesterday. And what do you make of it? The President, Chris Nenzani, saying that Jacques Fall is interim CEO. But you're not convinced that this is going to help?
It won't help. You know, this is the situation that Cricket South Africa are in now is like a husband and wife sharing a house after a bitter and acrimonious divorce. You know, one party has to move out. The board is completely discredited. Chris Nanzani's tenure is indelibly stained. They don't have the faith or the confidence of any section of the greater cricketing family, not the sponsors, not the fans, not the media, not the players, most importantly. The board have lost all credibility, and it was pitiful, absolutely pitiful, watching Chris Nanzani talk for almost an hour yesterday, in which he repeatedly said that the Members' Council have given us a mandate to continue the work that we're doing. I mean, it was, the board appointed Tabang Moreau and then presided over irrational and highly controversial and often dishonest administrative work that he did. And they're complicit, and they can't appoint him controversially, preside over 18 months of haphazard administration, and then say that they're not responsible. Bizarre.
Yeah. All right, Neil, we're going to have to leave it there, but thanks very much indeed for giving us some insights into this very bizarre set of circumstances that played out. Thanks so much indeed. That's SABC cricket commentator Neil Manthorpe talking to us about having his accreditation revoked by Cricket South Africa. And gentlemen, I don't even know where to begin, but quick comments from both of you about the media games that seem to have been played there, and very dangerous ones. Let me start with you, Makudu.
No, I mean, I think it's very disappointing that in 2019 we still have people who not only believe that, but who can take such actions and then go to public platforms and try to justify their actions and say that, we have revoked accreditation because we didn't agree with the content of the stories that these journalists were publishing. And I mean, I thought as a country, we've long passed that stage. And hearing the Tabang trying to justify it, I mean, it really just shocked me. Yeah. But I suppose the other thing for me was not only did I mean the people like Tabang who take the decisions that has taken. There are many people in our country and elsewhere on the continent who hold similar views, but publicly they behave as if they embrace media freedom and because they know that it has been established as a principle that you can't behave in the way that Tabang has around issues of media freedom. But he had, should I say, the temerity to say to the country so many years after democracy that no, we disagreed. But there are so many systems in place. He could have went to SANEF and said, we have problems with
there
some
are
of the
many
remedies.
Yeah.
But no, he didn't.
All right. So the other part that disturbed me was the issue of a planted story, and I just think I think it was the Sunday Times that ran with it. They just took it on face value, and one would have thought, as a journalist, you phone Graham Smith just to confirm.
Hey.
I mean that would seem to be the first thing that you'd want to do. But then again, I guess if you're getting it from a senior source that says this is your big scoop, it's less likely to happen. And maybe they did try and he wasn't available or something. I mean, we don't know, but clearly that's a problem, and that's not the first time that media have been caught wanting when they don't phone and check with the source. But
then journalists get used, and we try to think that we're this fourth estate. And here's a situation where we're being used by an organization for PR.
And again, that's sadly not an uncommon experience. The media today are frequently used to pursue agendas that are not in line with what the media's role should be, you know, and we've seen this on a countless number of occasions in our recent history. You know, one of the headlines of one of today's papers, I think you could say, well, what agenda is being pursued in running with that kind of a story? And this I think is, you know, clearly a bunch of headless chickens where they're under a lot of pressure to do something, and they think that they can try and control the narrative, and they just
made it worse.
They're just clueless, really.
All right, so we'll chat about the other stories a little bit later on. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, an interesting constitutional court ruling that played out this past week. Find out what that is and why it's important to talk about. Welcome back. You're still watching Media Monitor. Now, the Constitutional Court this past Wednesday ruled that the media is not allowed to disclose the identities of child victims. Now, this applies even after the child victim, witness or offender turns 18. NGOs led by the Centre for Child Law, Childline, NERCO and Media Monitoring Africa and Zephany Nurse won their challenge to have the identities of minor victims of crime protected. Now, the court case stems from the Zephany Nurse kidnap matter, which was heard in 2016. However, several publications, the editors of News 24, Netwerk 24, City Press, Rapport and the Daily Sun said that they were not pleased with the judgment.
Pending Parliament's remedying of the said defects, Section 154(3) of the Criminal Procedure Act is to read as follows. Open quote, no person shall publish in any manner whatever any information which reveals or may reveal the identity of an accused person under the age of 18 years or of a witness or of a victim at or in criminal proceedings who is under the age of 18 years, provided that the presiding judge or judicial officer may authorize the publication of so much of such information as he may deem fit, if the publication thereof would, in his opinion, be just and equitable and in the interest of any person. And the new Section 3, capital A, which is going to be an interim order, an accused person, a witness or victim referred to in subsection 3 does not forfeit the protections afforded by that subsection upon reaching the age of 18 years, but may consent to the publication of their identity after reaching the age of 18 years, or if consent is refused, their identity may be published at the discretion of a competent court.
Our reasoning for that argument was that the stigmatization still continues, the trauma still continues, and we want to make sure that that trauma, that stigmatization, they're able to process that better, deal with that better, even after they turn the age of 18, because it's important for their proper development as adults.
I think that this is going to hold our media to a higher standard, which, given the issues around credibility and given the importance and critical role our media play, this in the long run, I think, can only be good news for our media.
All right, so that was William Bird from Media Monitoring Africa, one of my guests today. Let's chat to him and Makudu about this important ruling. And it is an important ruling. Tell us why you went to all the effort to get some kind of sanction from the court.
So until this ruling, there's been a lot of grey areas around precisely what is and what isn't covered, and this is the start of getting a lot more clarity. So the interim order that's there means we now have to go to Parliament and get proper clarity on all of these things, because this is an incredibly difficult area of law, actually. So the way it stood was that if you were an accused or if you were a witness, you were afforded that protection, but not if you were a victim, which to our mind didn't make sense. And so one of the first things that, and all of the Constitutional Court judges, despite there being 3 rulings, agreed with that point, that protection should extend to victims. In other words, it's no longer just witnessed or accused, but also to victims. the second core component of that is that very often what happens is that people, the wheels of justice turn slowly, and depending on the nature of the matter, often they'll get to the end or before the end of the trial, and then the media feel that they can name someone. Now, if you remember back to Eugene Terblanche's murder trial, one of the accused there was actually underage when the murder happened, and then as time went on the day of judgment or sentencing, I forget which now, it was actually the accused's 18th birthday. And so some of the media decided that they could name him. As a direct result of that, he and his uncle had to leave where they were living and go into hiding because their lives were in imminent danger. So these things have very real consequences, and that's aside from the key point that, the trauma then can continue to stigmatize the people.
But they have turned 18.
Yes.
And other people who may be victims or committed crimes after they were 18 don't get the protection.
No.
So why should the protection continue to adulthood?
So if you commit an offence, for example, and you're a child, the whole reason there's a special criminal justice, there's a child justice law, there's all sorts of legal procedures. There's a reason why children are given a dedicated section in our constitution, and it's because there are differing capacities and understandings of what you do as a young person. There's no one that I know who can honestly say that they didn't do something that was fairly stupid or something that they may well have deeply regretted when they were a child, right? It's the nature of growing up. It's the way that you learn. So to then say that this thing, that because you did it or you were accused of it or that you were a victim of it or a witness of it when you were a child, that should then suddenly, when you afforded that protection, that suddenly just because you turn 18, that should all just fall away, simply doesn't make sense. And it's something that then lives on with that child when it was something that was done as a child. As opposed to now, if you or I go out and commit a criminal offence, we adults,
we can make those choices.
We need to make those choices and be
So
held
what was it
accountable.
about the Zephany case, Zephany nurse case, that said, look, we really have to go to court now and just get this cleared up?
So there what happened was, remember, the fact of the case was that she had discovered that she was in fact had been abducted as a baby, as an infant. And she went to the Centre for Child Law and they wrote to the media and said, can you give us an assurance that you're not going to reveal her identity when she turns 18? And they didn't want to give that. So they said then felt that they had no choice but to go and get an urgent interdict to prevent media from naming until this particular process could play out.
All right. So, Mankudu, your thoughts on this? Because there are a number of media houses saying, hang on, once you turn 18, it's fair game. Which side do you fall on?
No, I think it's a very complex matter to deal with. As your earlier question alludes, all of us when we are 18, the law assumes that we have the mental capability to deal with whatever issues that we must deal with and handle at that point, whether you're a victim or you're a witness or whatever. And so I suppose, the question from other quarters is, the offenses in this case, or the witnessing or being part of whatever criminality would have happened when the people involved were young. But when they are 18, then they have, in terms of, what I said earlier, the mental capability to handle what is happening in their lives at that point. But, I'm kind of, on both sides, because at the same time, I do acknowledge that, William makes a good point that, all of us when we were younger, we did certain things. And, it's not as if when you turn 18, you get to this magical point where even if you were in the process of healing from something that just happened, say a few weeks earlier or a year earlier, that all of a sudden that healing has completed its cycle. So that's why I'm
Right. Okay, so what does this mean for journalists? They must just abide. Now it's
the law. I mean, we've been doing this and focused on this. One of these is a key areas for the last 16 years, and our media by and large tend to get these things right. We're a lot better than media in other parts of our continent, and certainly better than Western Europe, the UK, and those things in protecting identities of children involved in these procedures. But of course, sometimes the media decide that they can do things. Now, if they do, they'll be guilty of a criminal offence.
So, hypothetical situation, and as journalists, your editors, tell me what you do in the situation. Presidential election happens, and a story surfaces about each one of the candidates about something they did at school, and there are pictures of them doing that, and it's some kind of vandalism, and it speaks to their behavior. This person has always said, I've never done anything wrong in my entire life. So what does a journalist do? Because he was 17 at the time, and the pictures now come up, he's an adult, he's running for the country. With this law, what does it mean?
Well, the first thing to ask is did it actually did criminal proceedings actually flow from that? In other words, if you've got a video of someone having a fight in a playground or vandalizing, breaking windows, I mean, what are they doing, right? What's the level of offence that they're committing, right? Because all of us in the wrong circumstances could well be videoed breaking windows. I know I did as a child, right? My mother, So you need to look at the extent of that particular criminal action, and then was the president tried for that, and what happened as a result of that, or the now potential president? And if he was, then you'd need to go to a court and say, look, we think that there's a legitimate public interest because these and these actions speak to the character of the person that is there, and then the court would decide, well, yes, actually, there may now be legitimate public interest in revealing these details. Of course, by the time you get to presidency,
but you're suggesting you must go to court. You can't just publish now.
No, I said the first thing you need to do is determine, did it go to court process?
If there was no court process, you've just found out this is what he did. His mates have leaked the pictures and they've said, look, this guy is a skeleton.
Well, they could argue legitimately there's a public interest in showing it, maybe.
As an editor, we'll test the law. We think that, I think that the person who's going to occupy that seat in the union building must pass a particular test. And that if he's an adult, the argument I made earlier about having just turned 18 and the process of healing doesn't apply to them. Now, at this point, it's about understanding who the president actually is, and that is important because some people might argue had we
but he was a minor at the time, incapable of making sensible decisions.
It's sort of, it's an important thing that helps you to understand the person, and I can argue that part of the reason we have some of the problems that we have with decisions that are taken at the union buildings, whether by the current president, the former president, the president before him, is because we have not paid much attention to the kind of people that were put in there. The ANC, to go political, put out a document called Through the Eye of the Needle. Very important document, very, very reasoned and argued. But if you take that document and you look at the presidents of the ANC, you look at presidents of other political parties, you look at some of the mayors and the things that happened in Tshwane, then you say, hey, we as the media, in fact, have a very big role to play in looking at the kind of people that are elevated in society to lead all of us, because they are given very major responsibilities to lead all of us. And if we don't do much to know and to understand who these people are, we put the wellness of our country at great risk.
Okay. Very interesting, and I'm sure that this is going to be tested again. And this is the good thing about the law, is that these circumstances come about and we find our way through it. Interesting chat, ladies and gentlemen, and we'll chat a bit more about some of the things on the front pages of papers. But right now, I'd like us to go back into our news archives. Now, on Thursday, the 5th of December, that marks the 6th anniversary of the passing of global icon and former president and founding father of democratic South Africa, Nelson Mandela. This is how the SABC remembered Madiba.
You're with SABC. This is live coverage as we remember and celebrate and mourn the life of the great man, Nelson Mandela.
It's really awe-inspiring if you reflect on his life, and we've been seeing all these various inserts about Desmond Tutu sharing his memories. We had a look at how children have experienced Madiba in South Africa and of course across the world. And I was listening and looking at all these books in front of us, Natasha, and reminded me of a quote of Tata Madiba when he talks about his time during the Rivonia trial. And one of these books, it's not on our table here this morning. Oh, here it is, after all. It's Nelson Mandela's Conversations with Myself. And in it you'll find this following quote. And he was talking about the risk of execution. And I quote, "The threat of death evoked no desire in me to play the role of martyr. I was ready to do it so if I had to. But the anxiety to live always lingered." And that's how we want to remember him, and that's how we want to remember his spirit. But talking about the Rivonia trial, let's have a quick look at what was said during that memorable time.
Nelson Mandela, Nelson Mandela, Nelson Mandela, out now finally. Nelson Mandela, Nelson Mandela.
I have fought against white domination. And I have fought against black domination. I have cherished the ideal of a democratic and free society in which all persons live together in harmony and with equal opportunities. It is an ideal which I hope to live for and to achieve. But if need be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die.
All right, so that's how the SABC helped you remember Madiba, who died 6 years ago, incredibly. All right, don't forget, hashtag SABC Media Monitor. That's where you can send us your thoughts and messages about what year you'd like us to go back to in our archives, because after all, there's a whole generation of young people who've missed out on a lot of South Africa's history, particularly in the 90s, 80s, and so on and so forth. And we'd like to go into our archives and bring some of that footage to you. All right, we're going to take a quick break, and then after that, we start unpacking some of our media stories. Welcome back. You're still watching Media Monitor, and we start now taking a look at what's in the newspapers this weekend. But we first take you to neighbouring Eswatini with our regular international editor feature, and we're now joined by Martin Zweli Dlamini, who's the editor of the Swaziland Times there, Swaziland News. Thanks so much indeed for joining us, Martin. Take us through what's happening in terms of the media. You've got quite a big story that you're breaking today.
Yes, Peter. It's a story of a neglected prince, His Royal Highness Prince Mzwandile. He is complaining that he has been neglected by his father, King Mswati III. So we contacted Palace, and fortunately, they confirmed that they are working on the matter. They know the child. In fact, he's 23 years old now. He's an adult.
So is he not part of the royalty officially? Is he part of one of the Queen's wife's children, or is this a child beyond the royal family?
No, he was born out of wedlock, Peter. Apparently, we gathered that the king has got many children outside marriage, so he's one of them.
And you say that the palace has acknowledged that he is, in fact, the king's son and that they're dealing with the matter.
Yes, yesterday I spoke to Mr. Lusendo Fagutse. He's the governor of Lutsitsini Palace. In fact, he's referred to as the traditional prime minister. And to our publication that they are working on the matter. In fact, he said they've been addressing it with the Queen Mother. The Queen Mother is said to have acknowledged that this boy belongs to the king. So they are working on it to officially connect him with his father.
All right. What else is in the papers? The Observer, what's that talking about?
The Observer, the lead story of the Observer is about the murder of one businessman, Mr. Jomo Khumalo. They are leading on a story whereby they are alleging that a hitman had followed him for 16 days. He was murdered about 2 weeks ago.
And who is this Mr. Jomo?
Mr. Jomo was a businessman in the transport industry. He was transporting commuters from South Africa to Eswatini and from Eswatini to South Africa. So he's a well-known businessman in the transport industry, owning many buses and combis both in South Africa and Eswatini.
All right. This isn't the first story like this that's come out of Eswatini. I remember not so long ago there was another prominent individual that was apparently hit as well.
Yes, it's not the first. It's not the first one, Peter. It's almost similar to that of Mr. Victor Kametse, who was executed or assassinated in this manner. Mr. Jomo Khumalo is said to have been followed by the hitman for 16 days, as alleged by the Observer. He was gunned down around Manzini, one of the cities in Eswatini.
All right, and then this third paper, Cabinet suspends decisions?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, Mr. Peter, because this one is about the case. Kanyizo is the first born child of the king and also a cabinet minister. So she's alleged to have tried to remove the board chairperson of Eswatini TV, but the cabinet is said to have suspended her decision. So there's some disagreements in cabinet at the power struggle.
All right, very interesting. Zweli, we're going to have to leave it there, but thanks very much indeed for joining us. A tiny kingdom of Eswatini, but lots of big stories coming out of there, certainly. Well, let's take a look at today's newspapers here in South Africa. And gentlemen, I want to start with you, Makudu. Yep. You have President Jacob Zuma, and you say that he flew secretly to Cuba to get treatment.
Yes, it's a story that we picked up just over a week ago. At the time, we had a one source, and so we couldn't go with it. But throughout the week, we made quite a number of calls to people who ought to know where the former president is. And we had a team of reporters working on the story, and part of what we established is that he flew to Cuba, and that all of the sources that we spoke to indicated that he wasn't well, and that he went to Cuba to seek medical attention. And obviously the question we asked was, what's the problem with him, and why couldn't he get assistance in the country? Former President Nelson Mandela, got assistance here. So the responses were that there were complications relating to his poisoning case of a few years ago, and others gave us some other stories relating to possible memory loss. But when we went back to other sources, they said no, it can't be that. So there was a bit of a toing and froing with a number of people around that. But whether or not he was out of the country, we didn't have a question. Whether or not he went to Cuba, we didn't have a question about that. And whether or not the former president wasn't well, all of the sources that we spoke to were in agreement.
All right. So what we know for sure, according to you, he did fall ill.
Yes.
And he did travel to Cuba to get some kind of treatment.
Yes.
What we're not sure about is what exactly is the problem.
Yeah, there's that debate about whether it's possible memory loss. It's a thing that other sources dismissed and said, because part of what part of what is mentioned by a single source about memory loss relates to early signs of Alzheimer's, not remembering certain things, being forgetful, and so on and so on. And then we, as a newspaper, then said, but remember the last time the former president appeared at the State Capture Commission, he was almost ridiculed for not recalling quite a number of things. And part of the debate at the time was, no, this is a strategy not to answer very tricky, incriminating questions about him. Could it be that strategy? We don't know for sure. That part is really speculation.
Okay, this one will certainly be a point of conversation for a few days at least. William, Sunday Independent has gone with this story, and I've got to admit, when I saw it, it just seems almost too amazing to be possibly true, that President Ramaphosa trying to kill his own party. Your thoughts on this? Because I think you half alluded to perhaps what might be behind this.
So I guess there are a couple of things with it. It says they spoke to 4 ANC NEC members who'd said that they'd approached the president with concerns about business, etc., and lack of commitment to transformation. Now, in a different context, I would use that quote to refer to them saying, well, what's going on with SAA and Eskom, and why are you appointing white men into positions of power there, right? And not to use that to then say, well, clearly they believe that he's getting rid of these people in order to hand them over to the capitalists in order to... So the thing that's odd about it is that some of it just doesn't quite make sense, right? If this is for elections 2024 and they're doing this deliberately to get rid of people and stop them from voting for them, which seems to be one of the elements that you referred to in one of the other sister paper stories, how do they think they're going to get in if you're not getting... so there are things about it that just don't seem to make much sense, right? And the moment those things start to occur, and when you've got too many gaps between saying, we spoke to these 4 people who confirmed that they raised this, to go from there to the idea that there's an orchestrated plot by a sitting president to then destabilize and destroy the ANC in order to then link up with these other mining magnates.
Okay,
I don't know. I mean, the headline does say amazing, so it's really quite amazing. So the little difficulty I have is that once President Ramaphosa has taken this, in the Sunday Independent's view, very difficult counter-revolutionary decisions, and then he steps out of the ANC, establishes a different party, how would he absolve himself from the decisions that he took when he was in the ANC? Because in any case, he's creating baggage for himself. So when he's outside the ANC and says, look at what a mess the ANC has created, we in the media and elsewhere, his critiques, his competitors, are easily going to be able to say, wait, hang on, you were not a victim of those decisions. You took those decisions yourself. So you can't absolve yourself. So that's the difficulty that the little difficulty that I have with the story.
All right, very interesting.
Would you have run it?
I mean, I don't know what they know that they didn't publish, but
I mean, because based on what's there, we should know and determine whether we would or not have run that.
Yeah.
And that's why I asked, because if there's stuff that they don't know, then they should have put that before us as the public to determine whether or not we would have run it.
All right, so could there be agendas at play, or perhaps, again, stories being planted in newspapers and journalists perhaps unwittingly being part of a bigger plot?
I don't know.
One.
I mean, the relationship is now very difficult between independent newspapers and President Cyril Ramaphosa. Minister Pravin.
So a lot of things at play here.
So there's a number of factors at play. So I really wouldn't know.
SAA, very briefly. I mean, 40% down in ticket sales. They were 5 minutes away, it sounds like, from being liquidated. Business rescue. Is this going to turn the corner? What do you think? What's your gut feeling?
There was a moment where the SABC was in a similar position, and the way you fix these things is you get good people in and you let them do their job, and you make sure that they've got the skills and capability to do it, because there shouldn't really be a reason why you can't run an airline. Lots of airlines around the world and lots of small airlines in South Africa run very well. So the fact that you've got all of that dominance should allow you to do something.
All right. Very briefly.
Yeah, I think briefly that the president's decision is a correct one. I think it's really one to be supported. SOEs can't be run, by people who just take decisions knowing that they will be bailed out. So I think a good call by the president.
Gentlemen, you've been great guest editors. Thanks very much indeed for coming through and sharing your thoughts with us. And you at home, thanks so much indeed for watching Media Monitor. Join us again at the same time next week at the same place for more of the same. From all of us, have a great week ahead and a wonderful weekend. Take care. Bye-bye.